Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with the next video in the countdown towards the resumption of the 2020-2021 Candidates Tournament to decide on the next challenger of world champion Magnus Carlsen. These 8 players have played half a tournament in March 2020 and will resume on April 19th, 2021 in Yekaterinburg in Russia. Clockwise from the top left, Caruana, Ding, Grishuk, Nepomniachtchi, Alexienko, Wang Hao, Giri and Vachier-Lagrave. And these are the standings. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Jan Nepomniachtchi are leading the tournament with 4.5 points out of 7 games. Followed by 4 players a full point behind, Caruana, Giri, Wang Hao and Grishuk. Ding and Alexienko are very unlikely to be Magnus Carlsen's next challenger. They will need a miracle. On Chess to Impress, we're counting down towards the resumption of this great event by looking at the 28 earlier candidate cycles in the history of the official World Championship. It all started in London 1883, where Zukertort and Steinitz finished in the first 2 places in that tournament. They played the first World Championship match 3 years later. Steinitz earned the right to a rematch against world champion Emanuel Lasker in St. Petersburg 1895-1896, and Paul Keres from Estonia won the tournament in the Netherlands in 1938 for a match against Alexander Alyechin, but he never got that match because World War II interfered. David Bronstein won Budapest and Moscow 1950 to qualify for a World Championship match against world champion Botvinnik. Vasily Smyslov won 2 candidate cycles in 1953 and 1956, and in 1959 Misha Tal won in Yugoslavia, and it was his turn to challenge Botvinnik. Tigran Petrosyan was Botvinnik's last challenger. He became world champion in 1963 after having won the candidates tournament in 1962. Boris Spassky also won 2 cycles in 1965 and 1968, and the great Bobby Fischer beat Tigran Petrosyan in Buenos Aires in 1971 for the match of the century against Spassky. Karpov beat Viktor Korchnoi in 1974 to qualify for a match against world champion Fischer. Fischer didn't play, and Karpov became world champion by default. Viktor Korchnoi won the next 2 cycles and twice lost to Karpov in the World Championship match. And there was Garry Kasparov. He came on the scene in 1984 and played the World Championship match in 1985 against Anatoly Karpov. Karpov came back, won the next 2 cycles. These 2 giants played a total of 5 World Championship matches against each other, and it was Nigel Short in 1993 to break the Karpov-Kasparov era by beating Karpov in the semi-finals and Timman in the final to qualify to play Kasparov. Anand was Kasparov's next challenger. We looked at that cycle in the last video, and in this video we're going to look at Shirov qualifying in Cazorla 1998. I will tell you that story in a minute. In the next videos we're going to look at Dortmund 2002, where Leko qualified to play Kramnik, and he almost beat Kramnik in 2004. 4 players qualified in Elisa 2007 for the World Championship tournament: Aronian, Gelfand, Grishuk and Leko. Anand became world champion later that year. Anand's next challengers were Topalov, Gelfand and Carlsen. Carlsen dethroned Anand, but Anand came back for a rematch against Carlsen in 2014. Karyakin and Caruana were Carlsen's last 2 challengers, and they both only lost in a tiebreak. So who will it be? Yekaterinburg 2020-2021. It's all going to start very soon again, and this is very exciting. As said, we're going to look at the candidate cycle of 1998. And we had this situation. In 1993, the reigning FIDE world champion Garry Kasparov decided to split from FIDE because he felt the organization was corrupt and formed a rival organization, the PCA. The PCA folded in 1996. The initial contract with sponsor Intel had expired. Kasparov looked for a new sponsor but was not able to find one. And he claimed he was the rightful world champion, so he looked for other ways to select his next challenger. Without the sponsorship of the Professional Chess Association, Kasparov found he was unable to organize a series of qualifying matches to choose a challenger. Eventually, in 1998, he announced that, based on their ratings and results, Vishwanathan Anand and Vladimir Kramnik were clearly the next 2 best players in the world, and that they would play a match to decide who would challenge for Kasparov's title. Anand, however, as a participant in the FIDE World Championship cycle, believed he was contractually obligated to not participate in a rival cycle and declined Kasparov's offer. Instead, a match was organized between Kramnik and Alexei Shirov from May 24th to June 5th, 1998 in Cazorla in Spain. Shirov was chosen because he was next in the PCA rating list and because of his strong performance at the Linares 1998 tournament. Despite being the underdog, Shirov won the match, which was over 10 games, with 2 wins, 7 draws and no losses. However, during 1998, Kasparov, Shirov and sponsors were unable to come to an agreement. Shirov rejected one offer of a match in California, but believed rejecting this offer did not mean waiving his rights for a match. In February 1999, Kasparov abandoned plans for a match with Shirov and pursued a match with Anand instead, on the basis that Anand was second to Kasparov on the ratings list. What a mess. Negotiations for a 1999 match failed, as did negotiations in 2000 with Anand expressing dissatisfaction with the contract. In March 2000 it was announced that negotiations with Anand had failed, and so Kasparov would negotiate a match with the next player in the rating list, Kramnik. This time negotiations were successful and the company Brain Games was formed to finance a Kasparov-Kramnik match in October 2000. And the rest is history, as Kramnik beat Kasparov and became the 14th world champion. One must feel for Shirov, who, like Keres in 1938, because of World War II interfering, qualified for the World Championship match but never got to play for it. This series is about the candidates tournaments and matches, so we're going to look at a game from this Shirov-Kramnik match, because that was a qualifier for the World Championship. We will look at the last game of the match, Game 9. Before the game, Shirov was leading 4.5, 3.5, and it was Kramnik's last game with the white pieces. He needed to win. As we already know that Shirov qualified, let's look at the game from Shirov's perspective, from the black side. Kramnik had to win, opened with a d-pawn, knight f6, c4, g6, and here knight c3 is the main move of the Grunfeld. But Kramnik played f3. He was behind in the match and chooses a sharp line against Shirov's Grunfeld. He had not played this one earlier in the match. d5, c takes, knight takes, and e4. White has a big pawn center. In the main line Grunfeld, black now has a chance to swap the knight on c3, but in this variation that's not an option for black. Shirov retreated to b6. Knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e3, Shirov castled, queen d2, and here knight c6 is the main move according to the database, but Shirov played e5, getting a foothold in the center. d5, c6, and h4. Kramnik is making his intentions clear. He's going after Shirov's king. C takes d5 was played in Grandmaster games, but h5 was Shirov's choice in 1998. The game was played on the 4th of June and we are in Cazorla, not too far from Linares, which in those years was the world capital of chess. Like nowadays it is St. Louis. Bishop e2. Shirov took in the center. E takes, knight 8 to d7, and Kramnik pushed the d-pawn. Knight f6, bishop g5, rook e8 and rook d1, choosing to keep the king in the center for the moment. And we'll see that that king in the center will play a big part in the game later. Bishop e6 developing, knight h3, that knight has to get into the game. And here the engine gives a move like rook c8, makes sense on the open file. But in the game, Shirov played knight c4. Attacking the queen, and Kramnik decided to take on c4. Bishop takes, b3 kicking the bishop, and the bishop went back to a6, forcing White's king to stay in the middle. White cannot castle kingside now. Here different moves are possible. Knight f2 is given by the engine, or even d7, but knight d5 was Kramnik's choice. The game is in the balance, but don't think you can take off that pawn on d6, because then there is knight takes f6, and that is check, and it's winning the queen. The queen is hanging on d6 and you cannot take with the queen on f6 because it's protected by the bishop. Shirov, of course, did not fall for that, and he played e4, which is a great move from Shirov. He needs to get counterplay before white can increase the pressure. Kramnik took on f6, bishop takes, and pushed the d-pawn. And now you and I would probably play a move like rook e6, but we are not Shirov, and in this position Shirov played the amazing move queen b6. What a move that is. Absolutely wonderful. Allowing white to promote with check, and that's what Kramnik did. D takes e8, takes a rook, promotes to a queen, and it is check, so you really have to recapture. Black is a full rook down, but e takes f3 check is a huge threat. Then all black's pieces are attacking the white king, which is stuck in the center. Kramnik found the only move, queen e3. Bishop takes g5, and now we have to be careful. We cannot recapture with the queen, because then we will get checkmated with white. E takes f3 check, king d2, queen d4 check, king c1, queen a1 check, king c2, rook check, king d2, and this is checkmate. So after bishop takes d5, we cannot take the bishop with the queen. We can also not take with the pawn, because then we get checkmated on the spot. That queen is no longer protected on e3. So what to do after bishop takes g5? Kramnik swapped the queens. That's really the only move. Shirov took on h4 with check, an in-between move. Kramnik played king d2. Shirov recaptured the queen. F takes e4 and rook takes e4. The fireworks are over and it's time to hear what a grandmaster has to say about this position. The English grandmaster Jonathan Spielman said Kramnik now went down rather quickly. He may have been able to put up a bit more resistance, but the position looks lost for white anyway. Not only did Shirov have 2 pawns for the exchange already, plus the bishop pair against a scrawny knight in an open position, but the manifest disorganization of the white forces promised, as occurred in the game, a further harvest before the position could be stabilized. So Spielman thought black was already winning here. But it's not easy, you have to show great technique. Let's see what Shirov did. After rook takes e4, Kramnik played king c2, rook g4, attacking the pawn on g2, rook d2 defending that pawn, bishop e7, and rook g1. Rather painful if you have to make this kind of move, but it's the only way to get the knight back into the game without dropping the g-pawn. King g7, improving the king. The knight comes back into the game without dropping the g-pawn, attacking the rook, so rook f4, and knight d3. At least the knight is a lot happier now than it was on h3. Attacking the rook again, so rook e4, rook g to d1, bishop b5, a4, bishop drop back to c6, and rook e1. There was not much white could do with the doubled rooks, and Kramnik decides to try and swap a pair of rooks. Shirov took, knight takes, bishop b4, rook e2, and bishop takes e1, parting with the mighty bishop pair to get another advantage. That is another pawn, so that black will have 3 connected pass pawns on the king side. Kramnik had to recapture, and there goes that pawn on g2, and now the h, g, and f pawns will start running. King d2, h4, king e3, bishop d5, b4, h3, and rook e2. White has to stop black playing the h3, h2 move, because then black will promote and white will have to give his rook for the new queen. f5, there goes another pawn, rook d2, bishop e4, king f4, and bishop g2, threatening h3, h2 again, followed by h1. Black will be happy to give up that bishop for a brand new queen. Kramnik gave a check, king f6, and now rook d6 does not work, because there is king e7, and if you take on g6, there is that h2 move again. You can take the bishop, but black will get a new queen. So after king f6, you cannot give another check. Kramnik played rook h7 behind the pawn to stop h3, h2, but there comes the g-pawn, king g3, and the f-pawn. King g4, king e5, and b4, b5 by Kramnik on move 48, and after making that move, Kramnik resigned. Flawless technique from Shirov, who is renowned as one of the world's greatest endgame players. Let's look at one example variation to show that this position is indeed hopeless for whites. Black will play king e4, and now if you take on g5, then there is f3, and one of those pawns will go through. If instead of taking on g5 after king e4 you play rook takes b7, then there is h2. The rook can hurry back, but it is too late. h1 queen, rook takes, bishop takes, and even you and I can win this game against Kramnik. So after king e4 you have to do something else. You can give a check. It doesn't really help you, but let's see how black can win then. King d4, another check, king e3. This is just one example how black can win. The rook can hurry back, but then there is king f2. You have to make a waiting move. King g1, nothing you can do, and then h2, and that pawn will go through to queen. Nothing that white can do against that. Wonderful game from Shirov, and it's a great shame that he did not get his justified reward by getting a shot at a World Championship match against Kasparov. Sometimes life is just not fair. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll keep counting down towards the resumption of the Canvas tournament with me. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. If you liked the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter and on Facebook. On Twitter, I've just started a chess trivia series. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.